Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a game that I played against none other than the famed American chess player Hans Niemann. Now, Title Tuesday is a big event. There are two of them that happen every single Tuesday. There's one in the morning, one in the evening. Now, in this early Title Tuesday, I got off to a really strong start. I actually won my first 8 games in the event. I was leading by 1 point clear with 8 out of 8, and then there were 4 players behind me with 7 points out of 8. And I was paired against one of those players, which of course was Hans Niemann. Now, in this game, I have the white pieces, Hans playing with the black pieces, and let's get right into the action. So I start with the move e4 and Hans decides to play c5. Now Hans and I have played a couple of times in Title Tuesday. The first time we played, I believe that he played e5 and we made a draw in the classic Ich bin ein Berliner variation with this knight takes e4, knight d6, and all this jazz with a repetition in the first 10 moves. So one time we did that. The second time he played the Caro-Kann. This game, of course, Hans made a big video about it, that he won that game. Very, very sharp double-edged game in the Caro-Kann. But today Hans decides to play the Sicilian. So Hans plays c5 on move 1. I play knight to f3. He goes d6, and now I play this move c3. Hans plays move knight f6, and I play bishop d3. Now this is what is known, at least to me in the English world, as the classic Kopek system, because there was an international master from America by the name of Danny Kopek who really liked the setup of putting a bishop on c2 where it guards the pawn, but then down the road you can play for d4 with the big white center here and the bishop potentially scoping on a long diagonal down the road. So after bishop d3, Hans decides to play the move bishop to d7 here, and now I play the move castles. After castles, Hans goes bishop c6. I play rook to e1, simply guarding the pawn on e4, and now Hans plays this move knight b to d7. Now I go bishop c2, and Hans plays e6. Now what Hans is aiming for here is he's trying to argue that the knights on d7 and f6 guard some critical squares in the center potentially, but also the bishop on c6 has some nice scope here on the diagonal, and black did not have to fianchetto it. Normally how you would get a position like this would be something like b6 followed by bishop to b7 with the fianchetto. So back to the game here. We get the position here after e6. Now I play the move d4. After d4, we have the move bishop to e7 being played by Hans. And now I go for this aggressive move e5. Now e5 is very, very aggressive here because what I'm trying to do is immediately I'm creating the classic connect 5 with this chain, but also I aim to open up this long diagonal for the light square b. Hans decides to trade the pawns. I take back with the pawn, and now he goes knight to d5. Here I play the move knight b d2, which is probably not the best move, by the way, but one thing, since this was a blitz game that I wasn't thinking about really at the time, is that I was sort of assuming Hans was going to castle his king to the queen side immediately, and the game would continue in a normal fashion. And that is why the computer likes to move a3 here first, because now if black plays a move like queen c7 to castle, similar to the game, I can always play something like c4 to kick the knight away where there's no square on b4. I can also try to play for something like b4 and queen e2 here, and very quickly I'm trying to push p on the queen side. So instead I play knight b2, sort of just like thinking that he's just going to castle, and then Hans plays queen c7, and as you can tell from the valuation bar already, I suddenly realized here that there are some serious issues in this position because black is trying to castle queenside. He is not necessarily going to go kingside, but he can go the other way and try to use the diagonal, try to start pushing p on the g and the h files. So here I play knight to f1, Hans plays h5. This is a move that I think is a little bit premature here for a couple of reasons. First of all, to me, it seems like black might want to play something like h6 and g5 here, whereas when Hans goes h5 and then I respond to h4, now you never have this idea with g5 because I'm covering the square with the pawn, the knight, and the bishop. So it's very hard to push g5 in this position, so h5 feels a little bit wrong. So now Hans castles. I play the move queen to e2, and Hans plays the move king to b8. After king to b8, I go a3 here, and now my idea is indeed to play c4. During the game, I thought about trying to play c4 right away, but now there's knight to b4 attacking the bishop and opening up the scope, and one sample line would be a move like bishop to e4 here, but black can even say trade and go knight to c6 here, and these knights are perfectly placed to target e5 and or try to move towards the center down the road. So I go a3 here with the idea of playing for c4 and stopping this jump for the horse. So after a3, we get knight to b6, and now I played the move bishop to f4, trying to guard the pawn on e5. Now this is a very serious mistake that I played here, and the thing is that in the game when I was making my move here, I only looked as far as the basic idea that let's just say I play a4. Actually, I guess this doesn't even work. So after takes knight e5, I could just sack the rook and go bishop f4, collecting the queen. But I was sort of tunneling on the fact that in this position, I thought the only idea was to try and win the pawn on e5 by removing the knight from f3, which guards the pawn. So I play bishop to f4, and now Hans takes, and I pretty much realized this as soon as I played bishop f4 that spaghetti-o time. I simply hung the pawn on h4. What I probably should have done here is I probably should have played the move knight 1 to h2, because now if black takes back, I recapture with the horse, and now my horse on f3 guards both of these pawns. So instead I go bishop f4, Hans trades, he takes on h4, and now I realize I'm in a lot of trouble at this point in the game. So I play knight d2 here, which is probably not a good move, but one of the things that you try to do in blitz games when you get a bad position is, especially here where I'm up like 10 to 15 seconds, I'm trying to play a little bit quickly, trying to put some pressure on the clock, because when people start feeling pressure on the clock, that tends to induce bad moves or potentially some mistakes. So I go knight d2, which is not the best move. Computer actually still thinks that after rook a d1 here, white is only marginally worse, but instead I go knight d2. Hans plays g5, and knight d2, I will add as well, was also a basic mistake, because after bishop h2 and g4, I didn't realize that I couldn't take this pawn at f7, because now black has rook to f8, and once again it's another spaghetti-o moment where I have to move the queen. And after takes, king h1, there are many ways for black to win, but probably simplest is g3, bishop g1. Computer even wants rook e8, but even like h4, h3 is enough. Bishop takes rook is enough, and black has probably 20 different ways to win the position. So instead I go queen to e2, and now Hans plays bishop e7, and I go c4 here, trying to keep this knight on b6 out of the action. Basically here, these knights are kind of a little bit restrictive. The knight can't get to d5, then how does the knight jump back? The other knight can't move to e5 or f6. So with these knights being boxed out by the pawns temporarily, if I can hold the knights in place just long enough, maybe I can bring the rook to the center and get some counterplay. So Hans plays the move rook d to g8, and now I play this move knight to e4. Hans goes h4, and I play this move bishop f4, and here Hans plays the move g3, which is not actually the best move. Computer here basically thinks that black should not see the boogeyman and simply capture the pawn on e5 here, because after knight takes e5, there really are no good ideas. If I play the move knight takes c5, there's knight to f3, creating a fossil where he checks the king and attacks the bishop. If I take with the pawn, it's a new fossil with pawn takes pawn, and now the king and the queen are both, the king's in check and the queen is under attack. If I play queen takes knight, pawn takes queen, takes, I'm completely lost here because the knight on c5 is under attack, and black is also going to capture the pawn on g2 on the next turn. Let's just say a sample line, knight d3, rook g2, king h1 here, and black can play bishop d6 with the idea of rook to h2, followed by rook to g8, winning the game in a few moves. So Hans instead plays g3, which is very, very fortunate for me. And now I go knight to d6. He plays this move f5. Now it's funny because during the game, I actually thought f5 was a really, really good move for a couple of reasons. First of all, the pawn on f7 is under attack, so it makes sense to try and guard this pawn. Secondarily, if black were to take here and go queen c6, now I always have ideas like bishop e4 to hit the queen and guard the pawn on g2. Whereas after black plays f5, let's just say I play a move like let's just say b3, a quiet move. After takes queen c6, now all the threats towards g2 remain alive, and I don't have this idea with bishop e4 because the pawn stops the bishop move. So after f5, I play the move rook a d1, Hans trades on f2, and now he plays this move queen c6. Now it's funny because during the game, and for those of you who are watching my live stream on Kick of the Time, you probably would have noticed that for a split second, I thought that I could play this move knight takes pawn here, pawn takes check, king a8 takes, but I realized that black can go h3 here, and I assume that I'm completely lost because if I go g3, there's h2, which wins the game. Rook guards the pawn, I can sack the queen, or black gets a second queen, and it's all over. But of course, our computer friends show us that we really do need to use time and come up with the best ideas, because oddly enough, in this position, the very quiet move bishop to g3 here actually stops all of black's threats, and the computer already thinks that white is very close to equal. But alas, in my split couple second calculations, I saw the position after h3. I did not see bishop g3, so in the end, I did not play knight takes pawn. So here I play the move king to h2, and now Hans takes knight, and this is a big mistake from Hans. I don't know exactly what Hans missed here. I suspect that he probably thought after takes he might have had some trick like knight f6 here or something like this, where after takes knight g4 black is winning. But if you go knight f6 here, I can take the knight and the bishop still guards the rook on d6. So that's my guess as to why Hans took this versus playing something else. Like, for example, a move like rook to g4 looks reasonable. h3 also makes sense, but Hans decided to take the knight. And now after rook takes bishop, black is actually in a lot of trouble here because the rook is guarded by the pawn. The queen has to retreat. And now I take this pawn on e6, which is the base of the pawn chain. And more importantly, both of these bishops start coming to life on the diagonals. So here, Hans plays king a8, I take on f5, he goes queen to f8, and now I play this move bishop h3. Now the computer likes bishop e4 a little bit more to put pressure on this long diagonal and use the two b's, but to me when I was looking at the position, bishop h3 felt much more natural because it stops any pawn push. Now there's really no pressure on the king side with the two rooks, and I can try to move my other rooks around and eventually push the e-pawn. So I go to h3, Hans takes on c4, I go rook to f1. Not the best move, but a move that I played as sort of a safe move, because when I go rook f1, now the queen is guarded, this pin isn't really effective, and I'm still guarding the pawn on e5 with the bishop. So Hans plays queen g7, I go queen to e2, which guards the pawn on e5, targets knight, and of course guards the pawn on g2 at the same time. Hans plays knight b6, and now I go b3. Now probably I should have played rook f6 here. I think I chose not to play because I was worried about knight. I guess knight d5 I just take. There's something I was worried about, but I played this move b3 instead. And the point behind b3 here is that if Hans were to take the pawn on a3, I can simply sack the rook. And after rook to a1, or I think even queen a2, both moves are good. I simply win this knight on a3, and down the road, let's just say b5 takes king b8. There's a very beautiful checkmate with check, king c8, and then check. And look at these bishops. They just checkmate the king on the two diagonals. So Hans goes knight to a5. Now I play queen b5, and here Hans finds the best move in the position, which is knight d5. Now at this point I thought already here I was very close to winning, but knight d5 really makes it very, very tricky now, because it looks like I can just take a free horse, but after knight takes bishop, rook takes knight, black has moved queen g3, checking the king and collecting the rook on f4 and winning the game with it. So I go king to h1, so that if Hans were to trade the knight for the bishop, now on queen g3, the king is no longer in check on the h2 square. So he goes rook f8, and now I play this move bishop h2. And what's great about this is that when you watch the live stream, and I'm sure we'll be posting the video of this game as well, I initially thought bishop to h6 was the best move, and then I did not play it. The computer says after bishop to h6, rook f1 and queen takes f1, white is simply winning. Because if black were to take with the rook, there's rook e8 with the classic ice skater checkmate, and if black moves the queen to, let's just say, h7, apparently bishop to f8 is the winning move, because now you have rook e8 with another back rank checkmate idea, and after knight 6 check knight here, I guess you go e6, or I guess queen f5, or even e6, something like this, and it's winning. But again, very, very dank, and with limited time on the clock, not super easy to spot. So I go bishop h2, retreating the bishop, and now I hope in the long term to use these two diagonals with the bishops. Hans decides to play knight c6 here, and now I play rook takes rook. Hans plays rook takes rook, and now I play the move queen takes c5. Now at this point we're getting kind of low on time here, and there probably are many ways to be better, but after queen c5 I figure that in this position the two bishops really guard this king. This bishop guards the pawn, the other bishop can go to g1, and so my king here on h1 should be very safe, whereas the black king on a8 is very weak here. They're back rank checkmate threats. Even with a6 there's threats on a diagonal as well, so it's much harder for black to play the position. So Hans goes rook f1, I play bishop g1, he plays knight c7, and now I play this move rook to f6. Now of course rook takes c6 would have simply won the game on the spot, because if black takes the rook, then I have queen a7 with a double a battery checkmate, and if black goes rook takes g1, I can then take with the king, and after b takes c6 takes here, and I guess, I don't know, queen d6, queen c5, or queen f6, all roads basically lead to Rome. Where white has two extra pawns on the queen side, the king is very open here. It's very easy to attack this king, and black has no threats towards the white king. So instead I play the move rook to f6, which is not the best move. Hans trades, he goes queen takes, and now I play this move queen to f2. Now also not the best move, probably b4, b5 slightly better, but at this point we're low on time, trying to press Hans on the clock as well, so I go queen f2. Here he plays queen e7. If he were to trade the queens after bishop takes f2, pawn on h4 is hanging here. Maybe it's still actually kind of okay for black after knight b5, but Hans instead decides to play queen e7. Now I go b4 here, and you'll notice that in this position, the big issue for black is that the two b's are really powerful on these diagonals combined with the queen, and the knights simply are not very well placed. So Hans goes a6 to stop b5. Now I play bishop to g4. He goes knight d5, and now I angle my bishop on this f3 to a8 diagonal. And here black is already in a lot of trouble, because if you move the knight, I swap the bishop for the horse, and then again we have the classic double A battery checkmate with queen to a7. So Hans goes queen to d8. Now I play queen to d2, and with these two b's placed perfectly towards the black king, I think that in practical play it's just too hard for black to defend. Hans goes knight c7, and now I play queen d4, threatening the checkmate on a7. Hans now plays the move king b8. He could have played b6 as well, perhaps, but now you're just opening up another diagonal. And even if I were to play the very rudimentary queen trade on b6 followed by bishop f2, this should also be winning for white with the two b's versus the two knights. And of course, I'm going to be up two pawns when I capture the pawn on h4 on the next turn. So after queen d4, Hans plays the move king to b8. Now I play the move queen to a7. He goes king to c8. I play bishop to h2. Here, apparently bishop g4. Oh, bishop g4 just wins on the spot, because after king here I can just check, and after king c6 there's a forced checkmate, but I chose to play bishop h2 instead, with the idea of going for queen b8 or bishop g4. Here Hans plays the move queen b6, and now after bishop g4 the game is effectively over, because now the king can only go to d8, and after queen to b8 you have to block with the horse here on c8. And Hans just resigns in this position. If he were to play knight c8, many ways to win. Simplest is just to take and play something like queen c5 here. Trade the queens. I have two b's versus one knight. Pawns are the exact same. And with an extra bishop on the board, I should win the game. So after queen b8, Hans resigns the game, and with that win I moved to 9 out of 9. I would go on to win the tournament. I did draw, I believe, the last two games against Min Lei Tuan from Vietnam, who would finish in second place, as well as Denis Lasvik, who I think finished in third if I'm not mistaken. But this game against Hans Niemann, of course, was the big game that propelled me to, I believe, my 6th victory in Title Tuesday in the great year of 2024. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you are not already a subscriber to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back soon with some more great YouTube only videos in the near future. See you guys. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.